was barred. They told him not to speak about law. They said, don't do anything concerning law. Well, he gives us insight, and he makes sure that we know the law regardless of what they said. Once again, a round of applause for our chairman. Gives me great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to bring our keynote speaker down to address you with some very vital information. We're going to have our drummers start their ritual as they bring our speaker down, ladies and gentlemen. His name will be Brother Anthony T. Browder. A round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. Come on down, drummers.
Hotep, New York. You know, I thought DC was the hot spot in the nation, but there's always something going on in New York, you know. Every time I come here, there's always something going on. As usual, I'm very pleased to be here and to have another opportunity to share with you some of my research information that I've been working on diligently over the last several years, and have the opportunity to share it with you. And I trust that you receive the knowledge in the spirit in which it was generated. Tonight, as usual, I'm going to be sharing with you information in several different formats, through speech as well as through visuals, because for those of you who don't know, I'm not trained as a historian. My primary training is in the field of design and advertising, art. But after I graduated from Howard and became aware of the fact that I had been miseducated, I began to assume responsibility for re-educating myself. I think Dr. Carter G. Woodson, Dr. Woodson said it best when he stated that every person had two educations, one that is given to him, the other which he gives himself. Another two, the latter is by far more significant because everything that is important in a person's life is that which they must seek out for themselves. It constitutes their real education. So it's all right to get the paper so that you can move out into society and do other things, but just don't think that that paper is your passport to success. We have an obligation and a responsibility to see to it that we put into our minds, put into our consciousness, put into our spirit knowledge of our history, our culture, our ancestors, and our God, so that we can exist within the society and keep our sanity as we continue to build a better place for those who will come behind us. That is our obligation, and that is our responsibility. I want to begin my remarks this evening by first acknowledging the memory and the spirit of a brother who was well known here in Harlem, Brother Dr. John Henry Clark, who is now an ancestor. A brother who I am obligated to acknowledge for having put me on the path, put my feet more firmly on the path, so that I could be very clear about the work that I must do throughout my life. And so wherever I go, I have to acknowledge the spirit of Professor Clark, and pray that I continue to do work that will make him proud. Pray that his spirit will continue to infuse me with the words and the knowledge which will allow me to do my small part to continue his work. Because much of what I am today, I owe to his guidance, to his direction. I also, I've been traveling quite a bit this month and just arrived home last night after having been on the road for about 5 days, and was checking my email last night around 1:30 and saw a message that Professor Leonard Jeffries' mother had passed 10 days ago. So I also want to extend my condolences to Brother Jeffries and his family, and ask that you all keep him in your prayers. Now, one of the realities of life is that we are going to see brothers and sisters come and go. And that is a part of life. That is the price we pay for being born. But also there's another aspect of life, and that is the fact that life is continual, life is cyclical. And that those who leave us in the physical still have the ability to commune with us in the spiritual, as long as we speak their names and keep their memories alive. And so it is not superstitious, it's not sacrilegious. It is of utmost importance that we understand what we must do in order to remain connected with those who are now ancestors, those who can fuel our thoughts and our actions with a spirit and an energy far greater than we can access here on the physical plane of existence. So I always am obligated to acknowledge that part of my reality. My topic for this evening is African Americans, history, new perspectives for a new millennium. There's been quite a bit of talk as of late about this new millennium, Y2K problem. I just heard on the news last week that there's another computer-related problem that is going to be just as bad, if not worse, than Y2K problem. Not very many people have heard about it. It turns out that computer programmers for years would always end their program with a series of nines. And so this September the 9th, 1999, 9999 is going to pose a very serious problem for those computers that are still operating off of the old programs. It is a problem that could be as potentially devastating as the Y2K problem. And so you're probably going to be hearing quite a lot about conflicts in the future. Conflicts have always arisen and will continue to arisen. Matter of fact, history is a story of conflicts. History also, as Professor Clark tells us, history is also a record of the accomplishments of people. And if we see that we are headed for conflict, then all we have to do is to study the various manifestations of that conflict so that we can prepare ourselves to be in the right place at the right time. History is always written by the survivors of any conflict. And so for those people who are totally dependent on technology and computers, who will probably bug out, who will probably commit suicide, who will probably be totally emotionally, physically, and psychologically devastated by whatever happens, those who are not part of that consciousness can use this as an opportunity to take advantage of doors that will be open to you. So in the midst of their disaster, there are opportunities for success for those who have their eyes open. So I would encourage you all to open your eyes. Some of the topics that I'm going to be discussing this evening as we talk about new perspectives for a new millennium are issues that I feel are crucial to us as a people if we are going to be around in the new millennium. Because I feel that we're at a very serious crossroads right now. When you consider everything that has been done to us, that continues to be done to us, and that more than likely will not cease at any point in time within the next 2 or 3 years, if we don't become more conscious of the problems that have been placed in our way, then we may not be here 200 years from now. Matter of fact, I had a dream about a month or so ago. It was really more like a nightmare. And I dreamt that it's maybe 50 years in the future. And a young girl, I don't know who she wasn't African, but a young girl was given an assignment to write for class. And that assignment was, whatever happened to black people? And as she went home to search the internet and to search the various CD-ROMs and other resources she had available to her, she found story after story after story of problems that we were confronted with that we did not deal with effectively. And as a result, we set the stage for others to determine it was time to get rid of us. And thus, we were no longer around. And our removal was deemed justifiable in the eyes of others who see us or saw us as a problem. I think it's clear. I think it's clear that many Europeans don't like us here. It's clear. And so I think it's futile to beg or to pray for them to have a change of heart. I think it is, at least based on my study of their history and their interaction with us throughout their history. I don't think things are going to change dramatically within the next 200, 300, 400 years. So given the historical realities that have been presented to us, I think our only recourse is begin to take more serious steps ourselves to protect ourselves and ensure that there will be a place for us in the world in the years to come, in the centuries to come. And I think we're at a point in time where if we don't do it, it's our problem. Based on our knowledge of the history of our interaction with our former enslavers. Okay? So with that said, let me move into my presentation. I want to begin my talk this evening by establishing an operational framework from which I will present my information. And this operational framework is rooted in three very basic and very fundamental realities. The first reality is that history shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that humanity began in Africa over 200,000 years ago. There's no debate about that. History shows that all races evolved from Africans through mutation, gene flow, genetic drift, and recombination of genetic material. That is a historical and scientifically proven reality. Research shows that civilization began in Africa, in the Nile Valley country, the nation of Kemet, which we now call today Egypt, and that Kemet laid the cornerstone for the ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome, which established the foundation for civilizations in France, Germany, Italy, England, and ultimately right here in the United States of America. There's no question about that. And so if we begin to look at that evidence, then we have to be clear or become clearer of a specific reality. And some of those realities are realities that we have to determine how we're going to deal with. Case in point, I want to share just a few visuals with you to reinforce some of these facts. And great. I don't know. Let's see here. Great, okay. This is just an overhead from the September 1997 issue of National Geographic magazine, which had an article about the oldest human footprints ever found on Earth. These footprints were discovered in South Africa, in an area near Cape Town, about 3 years ago. I had an opportunity to visit South Africa twice last year, and during the summer, during July of last year, there was an international conference in Sun City, in South Africa, an international conference with anthropologists, paleontologists, and other researchers, and their conclusions at the end of that conference was that there's no doubt that humanity began in Africa, and it appears as though the focus, the central point for the development of human beings was in South Africa, as opposed to Tanzania or Kenya as was previously thought. I had an opportunity to visit an area right outside of Johannesburg called Sterkfontein Caves. And it was in this cave where they found the skeleton of a female, which they originally thought was approximately 250,000 years old. This is Homo sapiens sapien, a human being. And they've just recently reanalyzed this skull and said that this African female was at least 300,000 years old. So what is becoming more clear as they do the research, that we have been on this planet much longer than they have ever imagined. We have been on this planet. And thus they also know that they are recent arrivals into the family of humanity. They understand that. They've also done, okay, yeah, sharpen it up. They've also done research, genetic research. In 1998 was when news of this research, this image will be a little bit better. News of this research was first made public in 1988 when geneticists studied the placentas of a number of women, all so-called races, all so-called nationalities. They studied the placentas in order to examine the mitochondrial DNA, which is that part of the cell structure which is passed on to a child from their mother. And they concluded that every person on earth has one common denominator. That is, every living human being on earth, or every human being who has ever lived, has possessed within their genetic structure the mitochondrial DNA, which links them to a group of women who are still living today in Africa. Again, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that we were the very first human beings on earth. Now, of course, you know, in recent years, they've developed a similar genetic test in order to determine the paternal DNA genes that have been passed on through one's bloodline. And they applied this test to the descendants of Thomas Jefferson and all right? And were able to substantiate beyond a reasonable doubt that Thomas Jefferson fathered at least one child by his enslaved mistress, Sally Hemings. All right? Well, she was a child. You can call her rape. That's what it was. But it's interesting to understand their psychosis and not to allow us to internalize their psychosis. The descendants of Thomas Jefferson said that it was impossible for this man to have sex with a slave. It was impossible. He was a moral man, and he couldn't engage in an action which would contradict his brilliance. Well, it just goes to show, one, he was a man, and two, he was a white man. So let us not get caught up in their confusion, and let us not engage in a debate in an issue which does not need to be discussed. All right? If we are clear about the issues that we've been confronted with over the years. And with regards to the development of civilization in Africa, if it is true that humanity began in Africa, then we have to acknowledge the fact that the first civilization also began in Africa. The first system of writing, the first system of government, the first system of language and laws, science, mathematics, and medicine also had their origins in Africa. in their origins in a civilization which reached its height in the nation that was called Kemet, now referred to today as Egypt. And Europeans had a need, had a desire to recreate as best they could the symbolic and architectural legacy of ancient Egypt. They had a desire because for hundreds of years they mistakenly believed that the Egyptians were white because they had been miseducated too. And so if you understand the true origins of ancient Kemet, understand its African origins, and with that understanding you can then move throughout the world and then claim those symbols that are part of your ancestors that have been appropriated by Europeans in order to try to make themselves something that they never were. And so in Washington, D.C., some 13 years ago, I designed a tour, an African-centered tour of Washington, D.C., which analyzed the architecture of that city and interpreted the symbolism related to that architecture in order to establish a fact, a historical fact, that the designers of Washington, D.C. attempted to recreate architecturally and symbolically the spiritual essence of ancient Kemet in order to infuse this newly formed nation with a force which would allow them to become the most powerful ruling body on earth. They have become that. They have become that. But what they also have done is to remove from our memory any knowledge of our links to the symbols that they appropriated from our ancestors. And so it was about 2 years ago when the brothers and sisters here at UAM came to Washington, D.C. for one of my African-centered tours. And I've just had a conversation prior to coming up here, and it appears as though they're going to make arrangements for another tour, African-centered tour of Washington, tentatively on April the 11th. And since you all have taken your last tour, I've added some other components, which essentially puts the nail in the coffin and proves beyond a shadow of a doubt exactly what the Europeans were doing. So when you come to Washington and you see that symbol, the symbol which symbolizes the most powerful nation on earth is a symbol which represents the resurrection of an African God. We cannot forget that. We cannot afford to disassociate ourselves from the historical significance of that symbol. It represents an African God who was born on December the 25th, at least 6,000 years before their God, Jesus. It represents an African God who was murdered, and after death, his spirit came and impregnated his wife, who was a virgin, and then this virgin woman gave birth to their son, who was born on the same day as his father, December the 25th. And this son was charged with the responsibility of restoring his father's kingdom on earth. Heru. This is what this symbol represents. And we should not allow anyone to misrepresent this symbol. It's also identified as a phallic symbol. This symbol, the meaning of this symbol it has multiple interpretations. And we have to be able to know which interpretation to apply at which particular time. And so this symbol did at one time represent the missing portion of a sar that his wife Aset did not find, his phallus, which was supposedly cut from his body and thrown into the Nile River and eaten by a catfish. But this symbol is a phallic symbol. A phallic symbol, a 555-foot high penis of an African that stands in the center of Washington, D.C. And if you understand that aspect of its history, maybe you can begin to understand why Bill Clinton can't keep his pants zipped up. See, the stuff works both ways. It works both ways. We also need to understand and be very clear of the mission of George Washington and the so-called founding fathers, after they won their freedom from England and established this nation. We have to be very clear that the very first act that George Washington initiated was to pull together a team of men, a team of artists and researchers whose responsibility it was to design a symbol which was to represent the heart and soul of this newly developed nation. And so this team took 6 years to study, research, and design the symbol which became known as the Great Seal of the United States of America. So the artist in me asks you all to understand that when an artist is charged with something, a job of that importance, they don't take it lightly, because they know that their work is supposed to stand the test of time. And the men who were responsible for designing this symbol, the men who took 6 years to design the symbol, were very clear about what they were doing. So when you see these symbols, you have to understand that they represented George Washington and the so-called founding fathers' desire to recreate symbolically and spiritually the essence of ancient Kemet here in this country, the United States of America. Are there any pyramids in England, France, Germany, Russia, Nova Scotia, Scotland, Lithuania, Ireland? There were, at last count, 92 pyramids in Egypt, 15 pyramids in the Sudan, south of Egypt, a dozen pyramids in Ethiopia, south of the Sudan. The only place outside of the continent of Africa where you will find pyramids is right here in this hemisphere, in Mesoamerica, pyramids that were built by African people who navigated the Atlantic Ocean somewhere around 1000 BCE and brought with them knowledge of stone construction, concepts of God, calendar, astronomy, and mathematics, which they introduced to the indigenous people. So this symbol is a representation of the industrious nature of African people. So we have to be clear of what this symbol is and whose it is. Front of the Great Seal also speaks to this mission, this desire on the part of the so-called founding fathers to recreate symbolically the essence of ancient Kemet. So when you look at the front of the Great Seal, the so-called emblem of the United States of America, understand that symbol, but more importantly, understand the origins of that symbol. That symbol was copied from the national symbol of Kemet, which was a personification of Heru, the son of Asar and Aset. Heru, the son of God. Understand also the philosophical and spiritual differences between these two symbols. The symbol of ancient Kemet, the symbol of Heru, shows him looking to his right, which symbolizes the future, shows him holding in each of his talons a symbol called a shin, which represents infinity. And above the shin is a symbol called the ankh, which represents life. And so our ancestors were talking about this process of achieving infinite life in the past and in the future. And they knew by understanding your past, by claiming your past, you can then determine what your future was going to be by infusing that information into your knowledge base today. A very simple, very basic, and very fundamental reality. And above his head was a symbol, the sun, which represented Heru, and also represented the creative force which is responsible for the development and the maintenance of all life here on planet Earth. Those who copied the symbol of Heru and created the symbol of the United States of America deviated from this African concept. They showed the eagle, which is a bird that was indigenous to the United States, holding in his claws two oppositional symbols. In the right talon, he holds an olive branch. In the left talon, he holds arrows, symbols of war and peace, which means then that he is always ready to go to war and maybe ask for peace while he can prepare himself to go to war again. All right? The history of this nation was founded in war. The history of this nation was founded in the destruction of the indigenous population, the rape and enslavement of African people, and the use of their labor to build what has become the wealthiest and most powerful nation on earth. Yes. But also inherent within this symbol is another language of numbers. A language of numbers which speaks to an unspoken way of seeing the universe and seeing and understanding your relationship to the universe. Numbers have meaning, just as letters have meaning when they're combined in a certain order to create words. Words, when strung together, create sentences. Sentences create paragraphs. Paragraphs create concepts and ideas which move and inspire humans. Numbers do the same thing, all right? Numbers do the same thing. So if you were to look at some numbers and understand what they mean, then they would change, that understanding would change the way that you look at everything around you. Because buildings, carvings, statues embody this knowledge of numbers, this science of numbers. For example, the number 1 has always been associated with God, the Creator. The number 2 represents man and woman who come from God. Number 3 represents the union of man and woman, which produces a child. All right, now understand the importance and the value of that fundamental reality. Children come through the union of men and women. Children don't come from 2 men or 2 women. That's Greek. That's Greek nonsense. Children don't come and should not come from men trying to play God and creating babies in test. I'll put this out here, but I guarantee you 100 years from now, humanity will look back on these test tube babies and realize that people were playing Frankenstein and creating monsters without souls. 100 years from now, people will look back and re-examine these scientific accomplishments. The number 4 is a number that symbolizes a cornerstone, a foundation, a base upon which something builds, upon which someone builds in order to position themselves to move forward. That's why Washington, D.C., Brother Jeffries in the house, my brother, Hotep, Brother Jeffries. That is the reason why the city of Washington, D.C., when it was designed, was originally designed to be in the shape of a square, 10 miles by 10 miles by 10 miles by 10 miles. This square, this 4-sided symbol, was to represent the cornerstone, the symbolic cornerstone for the establishment of this new nation here in this country. Everything has meaning, whether you are conscious of its meaning or not. The number 5 has always been associated with man. And the word man in its original context comes from the Sanskrit word which means mind. So the word man has no sexual connotation whatsoever. The word man means mind, just as the word woman means the womb that produces the mind. That is how minds are supposed to come into existence, through the female. Number 5 is associated with man, or the mind, because there are 5 basic parts on the human body: head, 2 arms, 2 legs. Men have 5 fingers, 5 toes, and 5 senses. That's why the Washington Monument was designed to be 555 feet. The designers of that structure knew that in making it, they deviated from the original formula for designing Tekken. Tekken were always designed so that the capstone of the pyramidion was to be 1/10 of the length of the shaft. Following that formula, the Washington Monument should have been a total of 550 feet high, but they added 5 additional feet in order to incorporate this symbolism of the number 5 in this monument, and to reinforce the fact that this monument was built not to honor a czar, but to honor George Washington. Right? So all of this stuff is encoded in architecture and symbols that are all around you. And doing some research on the African origins of architecture and symbolism, I found some phenomenal things about New York City. Remember the prison in New York City that they tore down that used to be called the Tombs? I want someone in this room, matter of fact, let me just charge somebody in this room with the responsibility of finding and sending to me a photograph, an old photograph of the Tombs. Why? Because that building was originally designed with the facade of an ancient Egyptian temple. If you look at the old photographs of this building, you'll see the papyrus columns, the lotus columns. You'll see the winged sun disk. You'll see Kemetic symbols all over that building. Why? Because 100 years ago, there was a movement within most cities in the United States to build prisons in the shape and with the design of ancient Kemetic temples. Why? Because it was in the Kemetic temples where the consciousness of man was reformed. Hence, reformatories and prisons were modeled after, superficially modeled after the temples in ancient Kemet. Okay? So, people have appropriated our knowledge, our history, and our symbols for thousands of years, empowered themselves with that knowledge, while at the same time telling us that Africa made no significant contribution to the development of humanity. They knew that if they could separate us from the power that exists within our very DNA, within our very genetic structure, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually, if they could separate us from that knowledge, they could continue to control us. That's the only way they remain in power, through our denial of our true selves. Okay? So with that basic, it only works as long as we continue to allow it to work. As they say, the dream works as long as you remain asleep. But if you wake up, it's a whole new ball game. All right? It's a whole new ball game. And so what I want you all to begin to understand is why these secrets have been kept away from us. And what they've done over the years in order to ensure that we remain disconnected from knowledge of self. All we have to do is to look back to the writings of ancient Africa, to the writings of ancient Kemet, and studied how people intentionally distorted historical realities. I take you back to 1795. 1795, a Frenchman by the name of Count Volney traveled through Kemet and other parts of the ancient world. And he wrote a journal of his travels called Ruins of Empire. And in that journal, he documented what he saw with his own eyes. And what he saw was the African origins of ancient Kemet. His book was a bestseller in France. It was a bestseller in England. And someone decided, some American publishers decided in around 1795 that they were going to publish an American edition of his bestseller and make some money on this side of the water. They did publish that, and then they ultimately invited Voney to come to the United States to do a speaking tour and book signing. Voney came to the States, looked at the American edition of his book, and then realized that they had omitted several pages and several significant paragraphs, which talked about the importance of history and put it into its correct historical context. I have to acknowledge Dr. Ben for bringing this book to me, or to us, and making us aware of this act. Voney, a passage that was omitted from the 1798 edition of Ruins of Empire, stated that there were a people in ancient times, there were a people now forgotten, who discovered while others were yet barbarians the elements of the arts and sciences. A race of men who are now ejected from society because of their sable skin and frizzy hair, founded on the study of the laws of nature, those scientific and religious principles which still govern the universe. Now, just understand that paragraph and why European Americans saw fit to remove it from that book. That there were in ancient times a people who are now forgotten, who discovered while Europeans were still barbarians. These Africans developed the elements of the arts and sciences. They studied the heavens, they studied nature, and they created those scientific and religious systems which still influence humanity today. White folk could not bear to allow that truth to be spoken, because it would begin to expose their lie. Right? They see, they had to lie to us, and they had to lie to themselves in order to maintain their positions of power. W.B. Du Bois, in his book, The World in Africa, gave an explanation as to this bizarre and inhumane behavior. Du Bois said that there can be but one explanation for this vulgarity of 19th century science. It was due to the slave trade and Negro slavery. It was due to the fact that the rise and the support of capitalism called for a rationalization based upon denigrating and discrediting Negroid peoples. It is especially significant that the science of Egyptology arose and flourished at the very time that the Cotton Kingdom reached its greatest power on the foundation of American Negro slavery. So there was no way on earth that these people now going to come out and say that the very people that we have enslaved, raped, and stolen are the very people to whom we